Okay, folks, so we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly Dungeon Muser this evening, because tonight we had planned a session of our Champions ongoing campaign, but I honestly had forgotten that it was Canada Day. At the time of recording, it is July 1st, 2022, which is Canada Day in Canada, so we have a lot of people who are off and doing celebrations for Canada Day. So we decided to postpone tonight's session, and I am going to be decided to do a mid-year check-in, as a State of the Union kind of check-in on the channel as well. We're 6 months into 2022 now, and I've been getting a little better at scheduling these things, so this seemed like a good opportunity to jump on and see how things have been in the last 6 months. So let me just double check, make sure we're actually streaming here, and it does appear so. Terrific. What I want to do with this hopefully short video is just talk about what we've been running over the last 3 months or so since the last check-in, and talk about plans for the second half of the year, and in general, the sort of, the state of some of the games we've got on the channel. We've had some interesting changes recently, or at least I find them interesting. Myself, I should say, and the players find them interesting. So let's talk about that. I guess the last thing I'll say before I jump into the overview of what we've been doing is a happy Canada Day to anyone who is joining us from the Great White North. So, ongoing campaign. So there's been a couple of things we've been doing over the last 3 months. We've had return to some ongoing campaigns, a brief interruption for one of our ongoing campaigns where what was intended to be a one-shot kind of got away from us and became a month-long kind of not war story, but like a month-long mini adventure. And then there was I had my first vacation of the year, actually, during the last 3 months too, so that sort of disrupted things. And we had our annual gaming marathon. So I guess it's been an eventful couple of months. The most long-running campaign we've got on the channel is our Night Below campaign. I should have grabbed this beforehand. Carl Sargent's awesome Night Below Mega Adventure. We're into the 140s of that campaign right now, and we finally got back to that at the beginning of shortly after March. We had been playing a Pathfinder 2nd Edition War Story with that. And then on May 1st, we sort of collectively all decided that, maybe it might be fun to do something for Star Wars, because May 4th fell on a Wednesday this year. So rather than using one of the many Star Wars RPGs that I had on hand, I took Acton Cthulhu, the 2D20 version, and hacked it so that we would have a Star Wars version of it, because I after running Star Trek Adventures in the past, I thought that would be a really good fit for it. For a Star Wars style game, and we played about 4 or 5 sessions of that 2D20 Star Wars, which was pretty good. It was pretty fun, and what that meant was that we weren't playing Night Below. Finally got back to Night Below not too long ago, and started talking about some of having been away from AD&D 2nd Edition for a while, and having it run a couple of other things. I had been thinking about making a switch to a different game, not as a war story, but as an ongoing thing. And one of the things that I was, for myself at least, was concerned with was making sure we were maintaining the tone of what had come before as much as we can. And, as much fun as we did have with Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and as much as I really enjoy that game, that would have been a dramatically different play experience than what AD&D 2nd Edition would have been. So we recently, about 2 weeks ago, started playing with Troll Lord Games' very cool Castles and Crusades. This is the 8th printing of the Player's Handbook, the most recent printing with this alternate cover. They released these by Kickstarter, and then they've got them available for sale on the site as well too. But keen viewers will note that these are kind of like realistic recreations of the classic AD&D 1st Edition covers. There's your Efreeti and the Monster Manual cover. If you're not familiar with Castles and Crusades, it's one of the earliest efforts at an old school game that was based on or at least made use of the open game license, the 2D20 system way back in the early 2000s. And then it's just been kind of tinkered with and added to with some extra supplements. It has many similarities to the old school games. The math is more modern, where it's ascending AC and like target numbers are always ascending. And then it has this interesting core mechanic called a siege system, where you've got a target number. It's a way of sort of like determining task resolution and saving throws and stuff like that, but you make use of preferred attributes and non-preferred attributes. You can play with just primary and secondary attributes. We play with a variant that has all 3 variants: primary, secondary, tertiary. And then the reason that those matter is because those set the starting difficulty class for your target numbers, and then your level plays in into the role. So what it means is that the game it offers you a little bit more in the way of game mechanics to keep things, or to have the level of the characters come into play. And it means that like low-level saving throws aren't as garbage as they are in a lot of old-school games, at least not because of the level. And then as you get higher level, the challenge against lower-level things will be very, very minimal. But against comparable things, there remains that sort of threat. So we had played that over our gaming marathon a couple of weeks back, where we played the adventure, here we go, Freedom, the first one published for Dark Sun, and we actually got through the whole module. I used an abridged version of it, obviously, because we only had 4 sessions to get through the whole thing. Anna says hi to everyone too. Hello, sweetie. And Castles and Crusades, I found online a variant of the Dark Sun rules that was written for Castles and Crusades, including a full conversion of the psionics rules and the additional psionics stuff from the Dragon Kings and Will and the Way supplement. And it worked fantastically. Like, for my money, the very best fit for the Dark Sun feel of any version I've tried. And I've run a whole bunch of different. I've run the Iron Kingdoms role-playing game with in Iron Kingdoms. I've used GURPS. I've used Champion or Hero, I guess. I've written my own thing based loosely on Unity. Like it, I love the setting, and this, I think, hands down, was the best fit for what the play experience was intended to be in the base set. Primarily because the psionics work the same in the Castles and Crusades version as they do in the AD&D second edition. One of the things that sort of gets not lost, but like ends up going through a bit of a transformation, in the same way that you lose Vancian casting when you sometimes switch over to different game rules for D&D settings. All the modern versions abandoned the older approaches to psionics rules, which felt very different from casting. So it was great, and the experience with that was sort of what sold me on pitching the change to Castles and Crusades for not only Night Below, but actually we're going to do this switch over in our Legacy of the Crystal Shard game too. And primarily because there are things that where the math and the lethality, there's just some wonky stuff that happens at the higher levels in AD&D second edition, or at least that's what I feel like it is happening. And I'm finding I'm having to bend the rules substantially more to meet the challenge because of the house rules we happen to play with. So, yeah, we've had 2 sessions with Castles and Crusades in Night Below so far. One of them was really more, it wasn't really a combat-heavy one. The second one was with a lot of combat, and we are still in the process of figuring out sort of what options we're going to play with in that. And if you did view our last session of Night Below, we played unrestricted with one of the options for critical hits, and it was fucking brutal. We had characters who were getting knocked out. We had characters who nearly had their heads bit off. We had one character have his knee shattered, and like, we've talked it over, and we're what rules for criticals we're going to end up playing with will be determined. We also play with some other I mentioned the 3 scale or 3 categories of attributes, as opposed to just the 2 that are in the default game. We're playing with that. We're also playing with 2 different kinds of narrative metacurrency that are from the Castle Keeper's Guide. It's the equivalent of the DMG. Sorry, that would be Anna Banana snorting in the background. Yep. Yeah, you want to say hi? All right. One of the narrative meta currencies is called Hero Points, which is a more powerful one. There's less of them. They regenerate a lot slower, but they allow you to sort of like get out of death stuff that we normally use, or re-roll dice rolls that we use with our Astonishing Fortune rolls. So they're very similar to that, although they've got a couple other options in it. And we also play with a mechanic called Luck. And Luck is a meta currency that regenerates every session, and you can spend it to modify your dice rolls and other people's dice rolls. So it's a pretty neat mechanic. It definitely is. It requires even, or allows for even more narrative control over the vagaries of the dice rolls than what the than what we had been playing with, but they don't, I've run now about 10 sessions of Castles and Crusades with those rules, and it doesn't feel broken. Like, it doesn't feel like it's the characters are overpowered. In particular, when they want to be saving those luck points, they only get a d6 roll plus their best attribute modifier, and modifiers cap out at +3 in Castles and Crusades. There's a unified one like there is in a lot of like 3rd edition going forward, modifiers, but they're condensed, so like you don't get a +3 unless you've got an 18 in your stat. You can actually, I will mention as well, like if you do want to, if you haven't checked out Castles and Crusades and you'd like to read it yourself, you can get, at least at the time of recording, a copy of the 7th printing of the Player's Handbook on DriveThruRPG for free, and it's pretty cool. Like, it's a different. It's one of those games that I feel it plays better than it reads, and unfortunately, if you want a game that's got a little bit more complexity in character creation, in the sense of if you like playing with feats or kits from AD&D 2nd edition, you might want to also take a look at the Castle Keeper's Guide, because that's where the rules for something called advantages are. And advantages are kind of similar to 5th edition feats, in the sense that they give you some sort of like big ability, but they're not as fiddly, I guess, as like 3rd edition feats. And there's not like chain feat. That's not true. There are some chain feats, or chain advantages, but they're not as, I don't know, they don't feel as boring, I guess, as I feel like the 3rd edition ones are. So yes, Anna, she likes the chain feats, so I guess. All right, sweetie. All right. I should not talk out of turn for them too much. So, what's the different play experience? I guess, like, one of the things that is pretty cool with this one is there are some changes to the character classes that we're seeing. Iterative attacks are not as prevalent as they are in AD&D or AD&D 2nd edition. I don't want to get too, I guess I should say, I'm intending, we're inching up towards 6,000 subscribers at the time of recording, and my plan is to do an overview of Castles and Crusades at 6,000. So I'll save the in-depth kind of analysis for that, or feel free to check it out yourself. It's been good. Like, it definitely, the critical hits and the fumbles from last session with Night Below were a little more extreme than what we had intended, but I'm really looking forward to seeing that game develop more under those rules. Because of the level parity thing as well, they're with Castles and Crusades, which obviously isn't there in AD&D. AD&D offers you really like ability modifier checks or saving throws. Those are your only, if you're not attacking something, those are your only real ways of doing task resolution, and neither of those really have your level come into play except for your saving throws. But the saving throws don't take into account what you're facing necessarily. There are certain monsters that give you like flat modifiers to like charm spells or petrification or whatnot, but that is very situational, as is the case with AD&D 2nd edition. So I'm looking forward to this more something that has more of a core mechanical underpinning to it, because I can steal some of the ideas I like from Pathfinder 2nd edition and incorporate some of them in to create some fun kind of minigame type things. It's also different ways of I'm able to adapt stuff from 5th edition that I've got that I like the Cinematic Environs series of survival books. I can use those and create a very different kind of survival rules. Regular viewers of the channel will know I love my survival rules. And I've got a set of rules that we're going to be playing with and testing out that I think will be interesting for that with Castles and Crusades. That'll be different from what we had previously. So I'm pretty excited about it. It's also really like the newest printing as well too is really a beautiful set of books too. Like they did a really nice job. One of the criticisms of the game before of CNC before was that they I guess it's a friend or someone they've known for quite a long time who did an awful lot of the art in it, and if you didn't care for that art, it meant that you didn't care for a lot of the art in the book. And they've gotten more variety in some of the more recent books that they've been putting out. So their friend's art is still in it, but they've also got a variety of other ones. And I prefer, I think, the art in this more so than just seeing the same kind of designs over and over again. So it's pretty cool. So that's with those two campaigns. And with Night Below, I'm excited. I've also taken quite a bit of time over the break while I was on vacation to help. I know you like it. Anna knows I'm going to talk about the Underdark next. So she is crying over that for our players. I didn't think to grab them, unfortunately. But I'm drawing from a bunch of different sources, including actual caving instructions and things like that I found online. But I'm using that and the Spelunker's Guide to a degree. There's a third 3.5 product called Underdark for Forgotten Realms that is awesome and very easily transferable to Castles and Crusades or to AD&D for that matter. That has some great ideas for presenting mechanically the Underdark and the situations in the Underdark, as well as some neat situational strategies that people will come up with to navigate and to get around. Not only navigate on the grander scale of getting around, going on long distance under the earth, but also in short-term spaces. Getting yourself up to a cave. And then the other thing I'm using is this product for Lamentations of the Flame Princess called Veins of the Earth, which has about half of it is useless for me, for my purposes, because it is more setting-based stuff and offers kind of an alternative to the Underdark, and it's kind of interesting stuff. It also has a singular artist in it, and if you don't like that art, it means you're not going to like any of the art in it, and it's a long book. It's about yay thick, but there are some really good. The other part of the book that I will find very helpful is, again, some ideas for for simulating and presenting the different cultures and creatures and stuff that you'll find under the earth, and really not realistic in the simulationist sense, but immersive realism for navigating around in caving in the Underdark. And also, in a not just a realistic portrayal of spelunking, but in a magical environment like the Underdark. And then also it's got some really great rules for abstracting kind of hex crawling in the Underdark. And I'm really excited to see how those work out, because I think it'll really, my hope is that it will make the exploration of the Night Below feel very, very alien, in the way that I think that it really should be, that they're in a completely unnatural environment that none of them, save for maybe the dwarf, is actually familiar with. So I've got a set of rules together for that as well that draws on those two sources primarily. I really do. There's that Spelunker's Guide that came out for 5th edition by the same author who did the old Dungeoneer Survival Guide, and those have some really good. There is some good information in there too. I just found that rubber meets the road stuff of how do I generate a map to navigate around, and how do I record where's the entrance to the cave and the exit to the cave and how many of them are. There are some good suggestions for it in there. I find that Veins of the Earth has a lot more random tables for generating things that I wouldn't anticipate, and for overland overland, I guess, underland movement, as well as the Underdark book just has some great rules for close-up fighting and stuff like that. So those are the two ones I'm primarily using for my rules, but I'm very excited for the characters to get down below and see how strange things are down there and see how they adapt their strategy. So Night Below is going strong and is going well. We had a really good session of our Legacy of the Crystal Shard campaign recently, which finally get back on track. That one's been difficult just because a lot of the players have had changes in availability or illness or whatever, and that has been difficult to schedule enough players to keep that one going. The change to Castles and Crusades in part was also occasioned because I think that I can balance encounters more easily in that game. So. So I'm really excited for that one as well too, and just like our Night Below campaign, that one's in its 80s. It's like 85 or 84 sessions long, and because of that, I didn't want to disrupt the tone by going to a very different fantasy game like Pathfinder 2. As much as I really love Pathfinder 2, I felt that would have been a substantial change in tone. But C&C gives us this opportunity to have a more modern, or at least a more contemporary rule set to underpin it, that I can make use of the parity of level stuff to make for fun and challenging encounters that aren't just accidentally going to kill a bunch of player characters, I should say. So those are our AD&D second edition campaign and kind of what's going on with those. In the last 3 months, we've also had 3 other campaigns kick off that weren't planned, I guess, from before, or 2 of them were planned as they were just starting off about 3 months ago, and we're a ways into them now. Those 3 are the Witcher campaign that we started to replace our Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea game. There is a Legend of the Five Rings game that was replacing our Cult ongoing campaign. And there was a Friday nights. We were playing Starfinder, but found that we kept having to do, fill-in games for it. We've switched that to be Champions, 6th edition. So let's talk about those very quickly. First off, the thing that replaced our Ash game was playing R. Talsorian's The Witcher RPG. If you're not familiar with it, it is, honestly, I see a lot of the interlock system in here. It feels, interlock was the one, hold on, let me make sure I'm not confusing this here. Fusion is what I'm thinking of. So Interlock was the name that was given to the system that drove like Cyberpunk 2020 and a couple other games. And what Fusion was an effort to try and take some ideas from Interlock and some ideas from Hero and create a hybrid game that sort of had ideas from both of them. There's a couple games like Sengoku was one of the ones that came to mind that came out with that. Bubblegum Crisis came out with that. And I can't remember if there was Dominion Tank Police, but there's a couple games that came out with it. Usagi Yojimbo, I think, used it as well. But this is mostly Interlock with a little bit of Hero put into it. And regular viewers of the channel will know that I am a big Hero system fan. It's really fun. We've completed the first adventure out of the Book of Tales. Their source book that came out with a bunch of adventures and then some additional game stuff at the back as well. They introduce gnomes and werebubs and Vran, I think they're called. No, what are they called? Yeah, Vran. In this book. The Witcher is one of my favorite, talk about a good or a well-designed game that fits the experience that the source materials experience, which is the video game in this case. It's not, they have a license. I can't remember, actually I shouldn't say, I don't know if their license covers the novels, but their license is with CD Projekt Red, so is that it, right? And I'm assuming it came about as a result of CD Projekt Red making their Cyberpunk, video game. So it's a really, I will say, if you are interested in checking the game out, either, PDF, you have no issues. Look for the second printing if you are looking for a printed version, because there was a huge amount of errata, including a rewriting of the combat system that came from first or second. If you don't mind looking up errata and using that, then there's no concern about what edition. But if for myself, I want to be able to look in the book and know what if there's some typos or some small tweaks to the rules, I don't care about checking up errata, but I don't want to have to see that the way combat is described in the core book is wrong. That said, the game is, man, oh man, it's light on its feet. in the sense of it plays very quick at the table, but the sort of like boss battle experience that you want to have with a Witcher game, where the facing off against a really tough adversary is going to be a challenging experience. That really fits well, but there's also a gritty threat to the game. There is a narrative meta currency in it called luck that you can spend before your roll to alter your to alter the bonus to your roll. But there's exploding dice in both directions, so you can, like, fumbles are a thing in the game, critical hits are a thing in the game. The critical hits themselves are hit location specific and give a very evocative bonus. There's also some great rules for treating wounds and like how long they take to recover, and like the difference between an untreated critical hit and a treated critical hit. It is a very, in terms of the like sliding scale for complexity for critical hits, if Rollmaster, say, with its multiple tables and whatnot, was at a 10, and basic D&D, which has no or AD&D, which has no critical hits, was at a 1, this would be about a 6, I think, 6 or a 5. So like you're looking at tables throughout it. You got to keep track of what critical hits your characters get, but the game feeds back in on itself and gives other characters abilities to treat those things and to mitigate the damage of those things. So there's a in-game justification and positive feedback loop in terms of giving characters an opportunity to make use of cool abilities that is present in the game. So I see that as a overwhelming positive, and I find it, having run Rollmaster fairly recently, I find this is a more streamlined approach, and it's clearer to see, like, oh, I collect X, Y, Z components, or I make use of Y ability, my doctor ability or whatnot, and I can see the results at the table, as opposed to Rollmaster, which is a little more attenuated in terms of the the direct path between collecting herbs, treating people, or like making use of first aid or such. The first adventure we played was a pretty straightforward murder mystery with a twist, which was pretty fun. It was a good reminder to myself as well of the things I need to do to prep to run pre-made adventures. I generally I run some pre-made adventures, but on the channel, but I often change them so much that if it's an ongoing game, it becomes a very different place. And this one, I did the same thing too. I sort of went off script at one point and just followed the story through to what I thought was a good conclusion. But it's a good series of adventures that are in there. Like, they're interesting. They highlight lots of different parts of the world. So if you're looking to get your head around the game, that's partly the reason I used a pre-made for the first one, is I wanted to see what they felt was a balanced encounter. And starting tomorrow, we will be kicking off a new leg of the campaign, which is going to be just like some of our other games where I'm writing everything. So we're not following through with the next adventure. We can always go back and run those ones. But I've got something I'd like to explore with it. I feel comfortable enough with the system and with the characters' capabilities and like how to appropriately challenge them that I'm excited to dive into it and really kind of make the game my own, as it were, with it. It's a great sort of middle ground between a very gritty fantasy RPG like, say, Warhammer Fantasy or Symbaroum, and a more kind of I guess heroic fantasy, like higher mid-level to high-level Dungeons and Dragons in a lot of cases. It's a really combat is something that is dangerous, but it's a shit ton of fun in the game as well, which is what it should be. There's some great back and forth of parrying and dodging, and like it feels like a very dynamic combat mechanic, which is, again, like feels appropriate for what it's trying to emulate. And with the show, into its 2 seasons now and an animated movie out for it on Netflix, it really is easy for everyone to get their head around like what the world is like if they've seen the show. In the same way that, like, if you're running Star Wars or Star Trek, you have sort of a heads up, or not a heads up, but you got a head start on people immersing themselves in that world and making decisions based on that knowledge of the world. So that's really helpful as well. I will say that the supplements that are out for the game at the time of recording that we've been using, apart from before I talk about supplements, I will also say the life path character generation for the system is a ton of fun. It does less to determine your mechanical abilities, like your stats and your skills and stuff like that, than what, say, like Traveler does. But it's so much fun, and it really like bakes in some great backstory stuff. And I find myself with this ongoing campaign writing to dive into that stuff. Like I really want to incorporate that stuff into the campaign. So it gives you a really good idea of how to create, character-focused subplots that play on the history of the heroes, and it gives you that fodder right through the, as you're creating the character. So it's really, really fun. So we got the core book. I mentioned the Book of Tales. There is, at the time of recording, a Witcher's Journal out for it, which is like a monster book. But really good stuff for this as well. It also adds in a rule, like way of kind of gamifying investigations. I'm not using those just yet, but they're interesting. The DM screen is awesome, and it comes with a nice little handout that adds the Noble as a career you can play, and Halflings, as well as a couple other things. It's got some NPC stats in it that I think were probably cut from the core rulebook. And then the most recent release is A Tome of Chaos, which is the Magic plus, like this is just, it has a ton of great stuff in it. If you're playing mages or druids or priests in the game, this dramatically expands on all of them from the core rulebook. It adds a bunch of spells. It adds new Witcher signs. It adds new alchemical kind of tricks you can do, new magic items you can create, as well as expanding on some of the darker side of magic. So necromancy, Goetia, the demon summoning, mutation is expanded in this. It also has an adventure at the back too, which I haven't read yet, so I don't know how good it is. But for me, this was really helpful to figure where magic users sort of fit in the world, as well as where certain parts of the cosmology, the supernatural cosmology, like demons and whatever. I never read the novels, so I don't have that advantage, and I haven't played the video game either. Apart from there's a point where you fight a griffin, and after that, it asked me to go wander around, and I was like, no, I'm not wasting my no. I haven't played that far into the adventure, but it's pretty great. It really adds a lot to the cosmology, and that's something I want to play with if I've got players who are playing mages and stuff. So that campaign has been a lot of fun. I'm really excited for this next arc of it. The other one we got that had kicked off at the time of the last recording was our Legend of the Five Rings game. Now, I've run this a few times on the channel, and it is, every time I do, I'm reminded how good this game is. I think I have a long history with Legend of the Five Rings because a friend of mine, Chad, who's played on the channel a few times, he introduced us to the card game way back when it was in its it was before Time of the Void came out. I think it was, I can't remember what the name of the supplement was or expansion, but he got us into the role-playing game as well at the time when the first edition book was out and the Dragon book was out, and the Unicorn book wasn't even out yet. So there was 2 books out for the game. We started playing with that. We played an ongoing game for a while with it, and then I dabbled a little bit with 2nd edition. 3rd edition I pretty much avoided. 4th edition I did play quite a bit. And then this I think is 5th edition. And this one, it gets rid of the D10 mechanic that was in so many of the other, every other edition of the game. And it adopted a narrative dice mechanic. This one's published by Fantasy Flight Games, the same publisher that published the Star Wars, most recent Star Wars RPGs, and Warhammer Fantasy 3rd edition, and Genesis, a game that's based on the same mechanic as what the Star Wars games were, the Fantasy Flight ones. This, for my money, is the best iteration of the narrative dice mechanic. It streamlines to using 2 kinds of dice in it, so there's less swinginess. It is... it's just a really, really great... it has a lot of great design decisions in it that encourage and give positive reasons to play up a lot of the more limiting parts of playing a samurai drama. The combat system is perfectly serviceable in this, but there's a ton of different mini game implementations of different kinds of conflicts. So it could be, Winter Court, scenes where courtiers are fighting it out with other and like navigating with other adversaries or trying to convince them. You can add a lot of different game mechanics and interesting opportunities to see what happens with the dice rolls through the same kind of core mechanic of conflicts, but they don't all feel the same. In the same way that sometimes if you use, like, there's certain games that in past have used the same dice mechanic for, like, you have, if you're going to do a courtier scene, well, there's courtier hit points and whatnot. And this doesn't feel that way. It feels more nuanced. We've only played about 3 sessions maybe of this so far, including the character creation sessions. So maybe 4 sessions. But anyway, I love it. It's a really, really good game. It feels like it encourages you to inhabit the world in a way that some of the other ones didn't help with. I'm not saying that the other ones weren't good games, and certainly 4th edition was a very, very well put together game. Lots of great stuff condensed into a lot of different books. But this one, it feels less like... it feels like it is more designed to have you constantly interacting with the fiction of that world. And that's part of the reason why you want to play a game like this, where you want to occupy the fantasy, quasi-Japanese, quasi-Chinese setting that is Rokugan and the Emerald Empire. So I'm really looking forward to... Our next session of that is on Sunday, and I'm looking forward to that. Our Friday game has changed from our ongoing... Starfighter game that had one person playing, or not one, but like one group of fixed people playing in it, to a more open-ended game playing Champions, the Hero System 6th edition version of it. As this is one of the like white whale campaigns I've had in mind for many, many years. I run Champions on and off in the last few years for odd sessions or pickup games, here and there. But I haven't run an ongoing campaign with Champions since I was a kid. And before I turned 18 even. I don't think I've run the game on an ongoing basis since that time. And I mean, the prospect of Champions is one of those games that just you hear, people, there are the odd person who has those lucky, when I was a kid, I played D&D with the same people and we played these really long campaigns and we played 0 to whatever else. And not you hear about those and that's it's great. But Hero, I find, and Champions in particular, I find you hear that more often than with any other game, where like people get committed to their characters and they just play and play and play and play and play. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Like the game itself allows for a lot of room for expansion. You don't break the game because it's a character or a point-based game, and you can always up the power of the adversaries in it. You're not worried about the characters outpacing the material in the same way that like you are in a level-based game. Once characters get to 15th level, you can't really go back and run a first-level adventure without substantial reworking. But in theory, you can with a Champions-type game, and the idea of running a Claremont-esque soap opera-style ongoing game with long-term plots and short-term difficulties and subplots that are character-focused, it's a dream. So we've kicked that off. We're playing a Champions game set in Canada with the heroes playing members of a group called The Guard. And we've only just introduced so far. We've sort of like played a couple of pickup games of it leading up to the kickoff of the actual campaign. But so far we've only had one, really properly introduced one hero to the series thus far. We've got some others that have we have an opportunity to introduce them, but those are some of my favorite sessions I've run this year. They're just Jeff. It helps. Jeff has been the player who has been able to play thus far, and he's a terrific player, both like tactically and role playing wise, and collaboratively as well too. He does his heavy lifting in the role playing scenes. Is eager to jump in and role play through the stuff, and they've been so much fun. It's such a great game. The only house rule we're playing with is a optional rule from 6th edition that adds basically like a similar to Castles and Crusades luck, where you roll at the start of the session and you can spend that stuff to alter dice rolls. It's awesome. It's just been a fantastic game so far. I've got so much fun stuff planned for it. I can't wait to see where the game goes. And the fights we've had and like the adventures and the NPCs and stuff we've developed so far has just been more fun than I could have hoped for. Like the thing where I feel the Champions experience is different from some of the other superhero experiences is because it is so simulationist. And if you're not familiar with the hero system, this dates back to the early 80s. It's a game that was developed by actually during a college lecture, as the story goes. But it is a very simulationist game, but it is scaled to simulate super heroic stuff in an easy and accessible way. In a way that, say GURPS was not. GURPS, if you're familiar with GURPS, that game also has a point-based system. It's a generic system. But that one is based more around grounded stuff, and you have to do a lot more contorting with the rules to get it to work with superhero games, which you don't with Champions. Champions feels, what we've said multiple times, it feels like what watching a Marvel Cinematic Universe film is like. You definitely feel super heroic, but you feel grounded in the world. So, yeah, great campaign. I can't wait to see where that one goes. Can't wait for you to meet more of the heroes that we have in that campaign. The other ongoing games we've got since December, we've been running on alternate Sundays. Our Spires of Paradar game, which is played with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, Spires of Paradar is my own custom setting that I basically over Christmas, I knew I was supposed to go home for Christmas and could not because of the Omicron thing coming out. I think we've all collectively tried to forget about that right now, but at the time there was a new variant of the COVID going around, and both my folks are immunocompromised. So I wasn't interested in exposing them. So I stayed here, and then rather to sort of give myself something to do, I created this setting that took a lot of my favorite stuff and then used one of my favorite games, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, to sort of create a bunch of, pre-gens at first level, and then we just played. We played a bunch of mysteries. The setting itself is a coal punk setting that owes a lot to Ravenloft and Dark Souls and, Gothic horror and some steampunk settings as well. Iron Kingdoms, the Iron Kingdom setting for sure. And it has grown into this own thing over the course of the last 6 months. And the characters are 3rd level now, and they've really become enmeshed in this slowly growing world of different NPCs and factions and mysteries and whatnot. And I'm intentionally writing the game as a way of, again, as if it was like a TV series where there are sort of mysteries, of the week, as it were, or maybe sometimes spread across 2 or 3 sessions. But there's also slow percolating mysteries that are unfolding as we go along. And we just kicked off season 2 of it. And it is, it's one of those games, again, like the players are fantastic in it and really give me a lot to work with as far as, embodying their characters and giving me a real clear idea of who their characters are and what they want and what they value. And I'm telling him, Anna's a big Paradar fan as well. And it also helps that the game itself, like Pathfinder 2 is, I mentioned this on Twitter today, that Pathfinder 2 is my favorite fantasy game, full stop. I love C&C, I love D&D, I love AD&D, I love D&D 5th. I love a lot of different kinds of D&D. Pathfinder 2 is my favorite of all of them right now. It's one of the few games that I run with no house rules whatsoever. I basically run it as written. And I find it very easy to improvise stuff, to, come up with fun ways of gamifying things like chases or investigations or whatever. It feels like a game that is very light on its feet, but also feels like it will support the weight of the combat scenes that I put in. There's always going to be variation with like dice rolls and stuff like that. My dice might be hot, the player's dice might be cold, or vice versa. But I feel like I can rely on the math of that game more to create interesting set piece fights, than I can in any other version of D&D, including 4th edition. And the marriage of those two things, this really, mystery, socializing, kind of, occultic backdrop, with this really solid game, it's just been a terrific amount of fun to run. And I've intentionally restricted myself to running Paradar stories only on those sessions, so that in this, and this isn't quite the same thing, obviously, but I think of it like the dilution of comics throughout the 90s, where, when there was one X-Men title written by Chris Claremont. I'm showing my colors here because I keep talking about Claremont, but he's fresh in my mind. Claremont's all those X-Men subplots and whatnot, all you need to do is read that one book, and you'd be rewarded 100 issues later with a revelation that was set forth in one. You didn't have to hunt through a bunch of different titles to figure out what was going on. You could just focus and read that one thing. I'm trying to do the same thing with Paradar, so I don't run a bunch of one-shots in Paradar or whatever. I don't want to dilute the story, as it were, and have everything happen to the people who are playing in that game and the characters who are playing in that game. And because the setting is custom to the characters and whatnot, we have opportunities to make, for instance, certain characters feel completely unique. We've got one character who's playing, I can't remember what it's called, the Ancestry is the animated doll. We have another character who's playing a patchwork man, it's called a Flesh Warped in Pathfinder 2, but because it's our own setting, he's the only one, or at least he was until our most recent session. And that kind of stuff really allows the players to feel like the whole world is turning on them in a way that you can't in any other kind of, setting where there is actually published material and there's canon and whatever else. So all of that together has made that for just an enormously fun game. And we most often have everyone there, too. So we've got a good, big group that we play with, and it's always fun to play with a big group of players. So that's a really great game as well. Let me think of what else we're doing. Alternate Sundays, we do 5 Rings on one, we do Paradar on the other, we do Legend of the 5 Rings on one, Legacy of the Crystal Shard on one Saturday, and we play Witcher on the other Saturday. Friday nights are Champions. Wednesdays, I should say, are the Night Below. So that's all of our ongoing campaigns. There's one game I want to talk about that we ran a one-shot for recently that was really, really fun, and I want to get back to, and that is another Fantasy Flight game. This is an older one. This is Death Watch. So this game was published as one of the 5 Warhammer 40K games that came out for 5 different lines through the license that Fantasy Flight had with them. The 5 games, if I can get it right, are Dark Heresy, 1st and 2nd edition. There was the last line they released for it was 2nd edition Dark Heresy, where you played people working for an Inquisitor, similar to the Eisenhorn novels. So there's Dark Heresy. Then there was Rogue Trader, where you played a rogue trader with a massive mile-long ship that would go from system to system, and there was a whole sub-mechanic of creating opportunities and stuff, but it's going around into a sector and getting different kind of getting into adventures and shit. Death Watch was the next one released for that, where you're playing members of the Death Watch chapter, the sort of anti-Xenos Space Marines drawn from all the other different kind of chapters. Their next one was Only War, I think it was Only War next, and then the final one was called Black Crusade. Only War was where you played members of the Imperial Guard, the sort of the grunt level troops. Gaunt's Ghost, I think, is the name of the novel series. I've only listened to one of them called Acropolis. That was really, really fun. But it's very kind of like a 40K version of Saving Private Ryan or Thin Red Line or whatnot. And the last one was Black Crusade, which was playing as Chaos characters. Death Watch we ran recently, and Death Watch, you're playing because you're playing Space Marines, these genetically engineered super soldiers. You play at more of a heroic tier and more of a epic level kind of scale than you would in a lot of the other versions, particularly Only War, where you're playing characters dying regularly is sort of part of the game. And we only played one session of it so far, but the mechanics are very similar to the old Warhammer Fantasy 1st and 2nd edition. It's a percentile-based system. It's very simulationist, so you got hit points and whatnot. It's not as... there's not as much abstraction in the dice mechanics as there is in Wrath and Glory, the current Warhammer 40K game that's out. And, man, it was just... really good, like a really, really fun experience. The play experience we had, it was Sean, again, like another great player. So great players always, make for or really help make for great experiences when the underlying, adventure and the game mechanics are there. And it was exactly as I hoped it would be, and it made me really, really, really want to play this with a full squad worth of characters. The combat was super fun and felt very appropriate for the source material. It did not feel as complicated as I thought it might. When you read it through, it seems like there's an awful lot of moving parts, but there are ways to manage that stuff. And yeah, it was great. Just really, really fun session. Enough that we talked about potentially postponing Five Rings in favor of Death Watch. We're going to get back to Death Watch because we all collectively, there's a couple of other players who really want to get in on it as well. But Five Rings has been that good that we want to make sure we see that at the very least that first adventure through before we make the transition to playing some Death Watch. But definitely would see some Death Watch in the near future. I'm going to take a quick sip of my coffee here. The wet the whistle, and then we'll talk about plans for the rest of the year. So those are the games that we've got that are ongoing. I'm really excited. I will say that, having taken the break recently and then have the gaming marathon, which was an enormous amount of fun, like so much fun. We got to play with a bunch of new people as well, which was really, really fun. So the Dark Sun is another setting that I think there's a really good chance of us getting back to that, but it's one of those ones where we really would like to be able to get back to it in an ongoing game, like really spend some time there, and figuring out where that fits in the calendar and how that suits everyone is just challenging. It might be that one's going to sit in the background until we, our Night Below campaign resolves, and then that makes the switch over to Dark Sun. But we're not in a rush to get to anything, and Dark Sun has been one of those games that has been it's a setting we all really enjoy and we like to get back to. Having played it with the Castles and Crusades rules, 100% sold that would be exactly the play experience we all want with that type of setting. And Dark Sun was so much fun. You can find a playlist with the full weekends, sessions, and we had an enormous amount of fun with that. Anyway, let's talk about plans going forward. So I'm going to talk about some games that have been either recently arrived, so they're kind of on my plate again, or things we've talked about with the players to get back to the table. One of them, I'll start with sort of some of the more obscure ones. I've mentioned this in I think at least the past two updates. This is MechWarrior 3rd Edition. This was the 3rd edition of the RPG. It was also published as Classic BattleTech RPG. It's different from the A Time of War adventure game that was published as part of there's some really beautiful hardcovers with matching sort of spines that all fit to make a big picture by Catalyst Labs. When Catalyst first FanPro took over first. FanPro took over from FASA when FanPro took over for the Classic BattleTech license, and they republished this. It's a completely oddball game, but I read it, and it's got a very cumbersome damage mechanic in it. It's got a pretty punishing character creation, life path system. But I read this at a point where just it I don't know why, but it lodged itself in as one of my favorite favorite never got it to the table games. And it's also a setting that I love. I played a ton of BattleTech as a kid. I'm not kept up on the novels or the current stuff yet, and I really haven't played the tabletop version for probably 6-7 years now. But every time I get back into BattleTech, I fall very, very hard back into it, and I'd really like to play a short campaign playing Solaris 7, the gambling world where all the gladiatorial mech fights take place. There's a great supplement for 3rd edition that came out for it, and this is the default material for this is set sort of before the most recent kind of era for it. It's in the mid Clan War era is where these supplements came out, which is about the time that I want to play in, where the clans sort of shaking things up, but it's not so it's not to the point where we're dealing with the Word of Blake all the time, and the worlds have all been burned down and stuff, and like that's an interesting time as well too. But I think the stories I'd be interested in exploring really are about like contests with the great houses and the disruption that came from the clans, but in the in the context of all those different factions in this corrupt gambling world of mech gladiators. So that's something, and I know there's a couple of other like hardcore BattleTech fans in our player base as well. Also, I've been watching The Boys recently, and it's reminding me of Aberrant, which is one of the 3 original Trinity games that came out. There was this one, Trinity, and at Adventure. We played Adventure last year, and it was great. Really, really fun session. Like one of the most fun sessions we had, or at least one of the most fun one-shots for sure that we've had in quite a few years. And the Aberrant system is obviously, it's a more abstracted than what Champions is, but it offers a very different experience. Like I think in past, I've struggled with what I was going to do with Aberrant, leaning more towards trying to run a standard kind of superhero thing. If you're not familiar with the setting, one of the conceits of it is that each of the 3 games takes place at a different point in the history of this world. And what we know happens between Aberrant, which is set in purportedly the modern day, and then so like in this one it was 98, I think, but like I would set it in the modern day. And the time of Trinity is that the superhumans, as they get more powerful and as they use their powers more aggressively, they become physically and psychologically deformed. They go mad, or they mutate, or whatever. And it's sort of an inbuilt part of the story there, and it's also aggressively set in a modern world. The book came out before things like Heroes or The Boys or whatever, but I think I really enjoy the mechanics in Adventure. I really like every time I've read this, I love it. It's got tons of Steve Prescott art in it too, which really sparks my imagination. I love Prescott's art, and I think it would give a very different type of experience from what Champions is. Champions, I'm going for a superhero, comic book type play experience. This one is that more grounded. You're a normal person who's got superpowers. I know there's a more recent version that has the story path system based around it. I didn't stream it, but I have run story path once now, and it's only one experience I've had with it thus far. Yeah, I do not. It's too much in my mind. I know there's other people who enjoy the system, and there's a ton of different games coming out for it that look really cool, but it seems to steal so many ideas from so many different other types of games. Like there's a 2D20 mechanic style thing in there, and there's stunt points similar to what you got in the Age system and whatnot, and it just makes for this it feels like a mess at the table. And I think over a lot of play, you could get it to a point where, and there's some really good math in it too for scaling super heroic stuff in the Aberrant one, but just having had that one really sour experience with one story path game and having such a positive experience with Adventure, I'm preferring to go with the original Aberrant rather than the current one that's in print. And again, I don't mean, you may find that all those options are exactly what is right for your table, so I don't mean to criticize the game as being fundamentally flawed or anything like that. It operates the way it's intended to do. There's no like wrong design decisions. It's just, for my sensibilities, it's too many options. It's just too much of a mess. I have recently, at the time of recording, also been we ran some really fun sessions of Star Trek Adventures, but including our 2D20 Star Wars game, and I love the 2D20 mechanic, but one game I have not got to the table but have owned for a long time has been the Last Unicorn Games versions of those Star Trek games. And with Strange New Worlds being out right now, which I am absolutely loving. There's a couple of rocky episodes in it, but the new Star Trek series Strange New Worlds is just, it's my favorite Trek thing I've seen since, I think, like last season of Enterprise. And I caved and finally tracked down a copy of the Last Unicorn Games Star Trek core game. Now, there are a ton of, like, not only fan, but, like, designers who work for Last Unicorn Games. If you're not familiar with Last Unicorn, they sort of imploded fairly unexpectedly with a bunch of products that were sort of in different stages of production. And many of the people who worked for Last Unicorn ended up going to work on the Decipher version of Star Trek, which is also a pretty good game, but I've run that a few times. I've never actually run Last Unicorn Games. The Next Generation, similar to the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games, what they chose to do, rather than just publishing one Star Wars game that you can just run with anything, they did one game for Next Generation, one game for Deep Space Nine, one game for the original series, and then they were going to publish one for Voyager, but the company fell apart before that happened. I mentioned that only because there were so many books that were in production. You can find basically a bunch of, like, supplementary material written by the people who were working on the game online for free. So, like, you know, starship construction and like a whole book on the Cardassians and a whole book on the movie era and on the Enterprise era. Like, it's great stuff that's on there. I'm more interested in exploring the Strange New Worlds kind of era of the I think it's I can't remember what century, 23rd century, I think, for this, 23rd century, I think. But in any event, it's and the reason is because of this game, it does have a narrative metacurrency in this called Edge, I believe, but it's not quite as abstracted. It's more of a traditional game than what some of the other ones are. And for some of my people I play with, I shouldn't say my players, some of my friends who we play with, I know that they are more comfortable with and kind of get a better connection with the fiction through these more traditional games. So I would definitely be interested in seeing how this plays at the table. And the sort of adventure of the week stuff fits, I think, quite well with that. Our recent experience with Star Wars has also reminded me how much I love the Star Wars Saga edition of the games. The final version of the Star Wars RPGs published by Wizards of the Coast before they lost the license. It is has the benefit of being a third edition, as it were, of the game, because it's the third version of it that they released. Anna, come here. Hey, get over here. Anna's going where all the wires are, so she definitely knows that's what gets attention. Goober. And we've had a couple of great one-shots with this over the last little while, and then we've also had some players who have tracked down a bunch of the books. So we've got a lot of people who are going to get... Okay, do you want that? Oh. No. Go around that way. Go around. There you go. Sorry, Anna is hiding her balls where she knows she will get a reaction from me. So, what we want to do is get that back. It's also closer to it's a kind of a midway point between third edition and fourth edition. Yeah, I mean, with the release of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series and more Star Wars stuff and Mandalorian, we've all been sort of thinking of ways to revisit, to kind of get back and play some more in the galaxy far, far away. And I did really enjoy the 2D20 thing, but I'd also like to give more Star Wars Saga a chance as well. I have also, at the time of recording, been listening to a lot of... I've been playing a lot of throw ball with Anna, but that's more of an offline thing. Hi, sweetie. I listened to the first 6 or 7 novels in the Gotrek and Felix run of Warhammer Fantasy. And we ran a Warhammer Fantasy, a short campaign of that last year, but those books, if you haven't listened to them, I would even give a try to the sample. I say listen because I find it easier if I'm driving long distances. I can put one of those on and listen to it, or have it playing in the background when I'm doing something else like game prep. You can read them like a normal person, but you have the first 6 books on Audible, and then an easy follow-up on Audible as well. You can listen to the sample of it. I love them. A great, really enjoyable series, and it really has made me want to get back to 4th edition. Now, last time we ran this, we used a Warhammer Fantasy 2nd edition, but there's 2 books that have come out recently, the Winds of Magic book, and I can't remember what it's called, Up in Arms or something like that. It's the fighter book, but they have reworked one of the core mechanics in this, which was, I think it's called Advantage or Edge, one of those 2 things, where in the core book, the way that it is supposed to be tracked is through like each individual character will gain advantage over certain other adversaries. So there's a lot of bookkeeping for each individual character for this narrative metacurrency that can, affect dice rolls. And in the core rules, it's not a metacurrency. It's just like you get a bonus of plus 10% versus that adversary if you successfully parried them or whatever. In the supplement that came out, which isn't out in print yet at the time of recording, but it converts it to being more like a momentum pool, like what a 2d20 game does. And I've got a lot more familiarity with that, and I actually like that mechanic a lot better. So that makes the combat a lot more versatile, and it gives more options for what you can do with advantage, which I really like. And it also, I think that the experience point system, it is definitely more finicky in 4th edition than it is in 2nd edition, but like anything that is finicky, finicky is also commensurate with detail, so that you can have a more detailed character creation process and have more options that you can, as you're advancing your character, you can pursue than the more regimented version in 2nd edition. I also feel that characters start off a little more powerful in 4th edition than they do in 2nd, and that fits more with the sensibilities that I want from the play experience. The heroes in Gotrek and Felix in their novels, there's a lot of bloodshed, there's a lot of dead characters that litter those books, but there are also characters who keep surviving because of like plot immunity, and I'd like to have game mechanics that are a little closer to that. Not that they're incapable of being hurt, but I want something that allows for that more cinematic action kind of like really dangerous combat style of play. Anna, please don't. Thank you, sweetie. Three more things to talk about that are sort of on my mind. I mentioned this as an influence on my Spires of Paradar campaign setting. But there are now the first 2 Kickstarters for the 5th edition versions of the Iron Kingdoms books are now out, and I really like them. As much as I really prefer the math and the gameplay with Pathfinder 2nd edition, this might be enough to convince me to try or to get back and try something ongoing with 5th. Iron Kingdoms Requiem is the new core rulebook basically for that. And in the first Kickstarter, they also released, there's some adventures which I didn't bother to grab. They also released a Monsternomicon, so you got your bestiary for all the things. And then the most recent thing has been Borderlands and Beyond, which expands out into a lot of the non-humans, so like the Rulik dwarves, the Iosan elves, the Nis elves, that stuff's all in here. Warlocks are in here in the sense of the like war machines, hordes, Iron Kingdoms warlocks, not D&D 5th warlocks. And they also released a book called The Borderlands Survival Guide. And this is my favorite of all the ones that have been released. I think the other ones are very, very cool. I like this one because it's got survival rules in it. It's got a ton of cool optional rules to tweak the game mechanics. And I'd really like to see how that one plays at the table. I also, before we ever had a channel, one of our longest running campaigns, which ran about 2.5 years-ish, was with the Iron Kingdoms RPG. And it was fantastic. The game itself, I found it kind of broke down. The math broke down in the game by the later levels, but it is a setting that is near and dear to my heart. And now that all these books are out and they're so good, it really makes me, I wish we had Pathfinder 2 versions of it, especially now that we got Guns and Gears out. But if this is the version that I can open up and run with these neat optional rules that the designers think will make it play more like a Immoren setting, like the Western Immoren, I'm willing to definitely give it a try. And I know there's quite a few, not quite a few, but for some of our players who likewise have that long-term connection to the Iron Kingdom. So it might be cool to get that back. Last 2 things. One is also a recent delivery. I can't remember if this was Kickstarted or this is just something that was new release, but 2300 AD. The newest release for the Traveler RPG from Mongoose, and Mongoose also released this year the updated core rulebook for it. The combination, the core rulebook, I mean, that doesn't necessarily get my heart a racing. as it were. But the 2300 AD setting, I loved the original one. I only ran it a handful of times, but it's one of those games that I read and I ran, and it just kind of occupied my mind for a long time. And then I did get a bunch of the supplements for Mongoose First Edition Traveler, but just never got a chance to get them to the table. And at the time I really picked those up, I was more into the Mongoose Second Edition, and this has been a long promised delivery for it. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a different world from the Third Imperium setting of Traveler. It is a less technologically advanced world. It is closer to like Firefly or like maybe Battlestar Galactica, where the world is more recognizable as our own. I know Battlestar Galactica came from like different planets and whatnot. It's not the 13 colonies or whatever it was called in the series. But this one, it feels like it's a near future game with really, I don't know, like there are some alien races, but they're very different from those in the Traveler universe. I don't know why. That sort of near future sci-fi, hard sci-fi stuff was just really captured my imagination as a kid. And the new books, one thing I will say for Mongoose Publishing is everything they put out is gorgeous, like absolutely gorgeous, amazing evocative art that really makes you want to play in the world. They always put these maps out with this really much harder cardstock than what competitors put out. The boxes are always super solid, so it's not like the flimsy crap that's going to break. And I love me some box sets, and the art is like, cutting edge isn't really a word you use with art, but it feels incredibly contemporary, like the kind of stuff you'd see in a modern, video game, something that has a much deeper budget for concept art and stuff. Like there's a combat armor there, some other dudes, some other travelers in there. Just a really gorgeous box set as well. So Traveler we ran Traveler several years ago for about half a year maybe, before we sort of went on to something else. And the character creation in Traveler is one of the most fun processes to go through of any RPG. And the setting for 2300 AD, I'm really, really excited about it. There's some cool adventures I've already got for previous editions, for the previous edition of this that I can pick up and play. And this new world, like it just, let me see if I can show you a little more of this awesome art. It just really, really gets my creative juices flowing here. And not to say that the art in the Third Imperium setting is not also very, very, very cool. It's just that this is closer to the kind of sci-fi I think that I'd like to run. Like, look at this stuff here. That is pretty cool. I don't know. The most recent sort of big Kickstarter release for Mongoose Traveler is the Mercenary box set and supplements, which I think are mostly geared towards the Third Imperium, but I don't know if there's any of that material you can use with this as well. I'll be looking into that, but just the box set itself is full. There's 3 books. It's full to the top of content in here. So like it may look like a thin little box set, but it's got a ton of stuff in it. And I think that the change up from the more fantastical or space opera sci-fi we're getting with some of the other stuff we've been running, like Starfinder or Star Wars or Star Trek, this would offer a very different type of experience at the table. The last thing I want to mention, just something that's come up recently, people have on our Discord server have been talking about GURPS quite a bit, and I am reminded that I have yet to get the Dungeon Fantasy RPG to the table. Dungeon Fantasy is one of the rare times that Steve Jackson Games, the publishers of GURPS. GURPS is a generic universal role-playing system, which is in its 4th edition right now. Dungeon Fantasy grew out of a series of PDF supplements that were released to sort of take that universal rule set and make it play more like classic D&D, like Dungeon Delvers and less lethal. One thing that can be said for GURPS, if you're running it strictly as, bog standard, out of the box, normal characters, it gives the play experience that mirrors what you would experience in real life. Getting stabbed with a knife is extremely dangerous in GURPS. You know, for instance, for normal characters, gunshots are super dangerous. They can be, you know, maybe they're not not going to kill you outright, but there's always that risk of, you know, that single combat in GURPS is very, very tense. And and GURPS has been one of my longtime favorites too, where when Hero fell by the wayside and I wasn't indulging, you know, my generic RPG, you know, fancy with that game, I found GURPS fourth edition, and I ran a moderately long-term, I should say, GURPS Eberron game. And the GURPS Eberron game was a lot of fun. It really gave a fun experience and a fun perspective on a D&D style of play. And I used GURPS to run a shit ton of different things like Old West and, you know, Marvel superhero stuff for a long time until I think like 4th edition came out. GURPS was my go-to game for pretty much everything. And then I sort of fell away from it, and I've run 1 or 2 sessions of it on the channel, but Dungeon Fantasy was this deluxe version of those PDFs. Took those PDFs and rewrote it as one solid, you know, set of rules for playing that type of D&D-esque fantasy. And it's all in one box set, so you got all the rules you need in there, everything, all the modifications to the rules that you would need to make to suit that play experience is done in it, so you're ready to go with that. And then one of our favorite creators on the channel, Douglas Cole of Gaming Ballistic, he also published a bunch of supplements for Dungeon Fantasy that are set in his own kind of Viking-esque setting of, I think it's called Nordland. Including most recently, he kickstarted a bestiary for it that is basically like most of the contents of the monster manual through the lens of this Norse setting, but easily, you know, usable with the serial numbers, you know, filed off. So I got a ton of great material for this beyond just the box set, and I've loved GURPS for a very, very, very long time and had a lot of great experience with it. And it gives a unique simulationist experience, similar to what I like about the play experience with Champions, where it feels very grounded. GURPS does as well. You know, fighting a wolf in GURPS is never a small thing, right? Like it's if you do happen to get bit, or you know, especially in a vulnerable area, you know, things can go south pretty quickly. So it's not like in D&D where there's a cognizance of like, well, I'm more powerful than this. Like every fight, in a similar way to the way it is with Witcher or Warhammer Fantasy, every fight in GURPS can potentially be dangerous, but with the Dungeon Fantasy rules, it is mitigated in the hero's favor, most definitely. And they get to make some really interesting decisions tactically, I think, with like, you know, feints and so forth, that that allow it to, again, play in that very, that very evocative, almost like cinematic, in the sense of like TV or film experience, the way that a lot of other games don't. It's very complicated. You know, there's a lot of fiddly bits in it. Combat rounds are 1 second, so it is definitely not for everybody. There's a bit of rules overload with some, but at the very least, it's been such a long time since I've run GURPS, and Dungeon Fantasy is the one I'd really like to see. It is more complicated, and the characters are more powerful than when I ran GURPS Eberron, but I am very interested to see how that feels at the table. Like, what does it feel like? So those are the games I've got. Those other ones I mentioned, those are the ones I'm sort of percolating over the next 6 months. I don't know what necessarily we're going to do. Maybe some of those will be one-shots. Maybe some of those will be charity sessions that we're going to run. We just recently had our first charity raffle of the year, and I'll mention again that if you have won something or you donated and you haven't gone back to check on the Charity Initiatives channel of the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel or Discord server, be sure to go there and check that, because there's a bunch of people I have not heard from, including people who have won some pretty big prizes. So definitely, if you have not done so yet, go and check and see if you won anything. Let me know where you are so I can get those out to you. Other than that, that's sort of where things stand. We got a lot of ongoing games right now that I'm really enjoying. I've I'm feeling creatively satisfied as a DM with all the ongoing games in a way that I haven't for quite a while now. So I'm really enjoying. There might be a time where the churn of having to create for each of these things is feeling like too much, but that is not how I'm feeling right now. I feel like everything is hitting at a great tempo, and I'm really excited for a lot of these other games as well too. Now that we've got all these ongoing games as in kind of motion going forward, I can turn my attention to one-shots and to charity sessions and figure out what we kind of want to do with them. I've got an idea for one that's going to involve Pathfinder 2 that is really going to be out of the box from anything that is at least officially Pathfinder, but I'm looking forward to sharing more news about that once we get the plans more finalized. But we're going to see other ways we can twist and turn Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I'm going to check with chat, see if anyone's in there, has any questions or comments, and we'll address those. Hi, everybody in chat. Random, I completely agree. The crits in CNC were extremely close calls. Oh, that's great to hear. Really exciting. Yeah, it's funny because I went two ways on it. We're waiting to hear from the players, and I don't want to put my thumb on the scale because I'm letting the players decide what rules we're playing with. But we've got a way of sort of, I think, mechanically balancing these really exciting and lethal, potentially lethal critical hits with, the frequency of them being when they're fighting really powerful shit as opposed to, and very rare when they're fighting low-powered shit. So I think, I'm waiting to see what the players are. We've got we're having a vote between now and next Wednesday to see what they're going to play with. But I agree. The thing I like about critical hits is that they add, they just add something extra. They add a little bit of extra variety. As with anything, too much of a good thing can be bad for you or for the campaign. But I really enjoy the unexpected complications that come with that stuff. And it's really more focused on the players. When they do it to their adversaries, they're generally, if they're fighting them, they're trying to kill them anyway. So that end result is just expedited with a critical hit. But when it's on the players, they're like, shit, I just shattered my kneecap. That's something that they got to deal with, not only in the fight, but in their ongoing thing. What do you do with when your one of your heroes has been rendered, limping with only one leg? How does that affect overland travel, your plans for that, and whatever? So I agree. I think they do really add something. Hector, thanks so much. I'm telling you, I really enjoy your games. Oh, thanks very much, Hector. I'm really glad that you found. We love seeing people get something out of it. The best thing I love, the thing I love the most is when people find something we're running and are like, oh, I think that'll be fun at our table, and end up giving it a try. That's just awesome. Any way we can facilitate more play with is just fabulous. It's a great way of us trying to share our love of the hobby. So I'm glad to hear, Hector. Rom, what system am I talking about right now? That I couldn't tell you. Sorry, I don't know. Jeffrey, what's going on? Jeffrey, yes, Firewing. I definitely have to. I have Firewing on the list of heroes. Firewing is one of those ones where there's really only one way to sort of introduce the character, and you need to have a team to be able to manage him. Otherwise, he will be steamrolling people. But I think you'll be pleased with some of the other signature heroes, or villains, I should say, that are from the Champions universe that we will be seeing in our Champions the Guard campaign. Let's see here. Dark and Bark and English and Friends. Yes, she can. She is multilingual. Any more Dangerous Journey sessions planned? Hey, Tim, thanks. We don't have anything planned for Dangerous Journeys. Dangerous Journeys there's a couple of us who really, really, really loved it, and there are other players who sort of tolerated it, I think. And it's a really... I had an enormous amount of fun getting to know the game, and I think I was talking about the play experience with GURPS, where it feels like it's a really dangerous, sort of fight, but things feel mitigated in favor of the heroes. I feel like Dangerous Journeys would be that kind of game too. But it's It's difficult for one primary reason. Most of our players have a copy of the Dangerous Journeys books, or they're being mailed out when I mail out the prize rewards. The difficulty with Dangerous Journeys is that it will require a lot of tinkering along the way, and I don't know what, just like, the idea for a Dark Sun game, that's one of those games that would, I think, shine best with an ongoing game as opposed to a one-shot, and I don't know where we fit that in the schedule. For certain games where they're really only, their strength is how they play over the long term, like how I think Dangerous Journeys would play, it's tough to figure out where we fit that in the calendar. So yeah. And the other thing, I guess, is that Dangerous Journeys did not feel like it. It felt like it was challenging when you had a smaller group and there was combat. It was a little unpredictable for that, and that's what, Starfinder has the same issue. Starfinder, there are ways of designing encounters and such for small groups of characters, for combat encounters, I mean, but it is very difficult and much harder to do than, say, with Castles and Crusades, or with Pathfinder 2 for that matter, or for many of the other, like Witcher, or Legend of Five Rings, or Death Watch. Like all those games, the characters are durable enough that they can be on their own. So if we find ourselves down to 2 players, we can still keep playing with the ongoing game. And Dangerous Journeys did not feel necessarily like that. So because of that, because it needs to be an ongoing game, but it also requires, I think it plays best with a bigger group. It just sort of, it's a great and interesting game, but I don't know where we fit it in the schedule. And I don't know if it's the game that there's enough of us who are really as enamored with learning it and mastering it, which is what we would require to bother, giving it an ongoing campaign. So that's what it is. I mean, it was really, really a lot of fun playing it. I think it's a way better game than what people, at least at the time, gave it credit for. There is a much more interesting game in that in those rules, and a really definitely playable game at its core, but it was a victim of bad timing, a really unfortunate lawsuit, and it could have definitely benefited from a very strong editorial hand in reworking some of the text and some of the game mechanics, just to be, even like the nomenclature in the game, because they were so intent on trying not to get sued, some of the nomenclature was just very challenging for some of our players to wrap their head around, to remember what they were talking about in different things. So that's where Dangerous Journeys is. Still a really, really cool game, but yeah, I just don't know when or if we're going to get back to that anytime soon. And Tim, love the Castle Crusade set. Oh, that's great to hear, Tim. Yeah, thanks. And Tim, so Tim mentions that he likes seeing the Night Below games and with different mechanics. It's honestly one of the things I've loved for years and years now, is that, with being able to see different heroes and different kind of established characters through the lens of different game mechanics is always, I don't like to try, or at least I try and restrain myself to a degree to not constantly be doing that. But I really enjoy our War Story sessions where we get a chance to see how another system handles certain characters. Like we've done it with 4th edition before, we've done it with Pathfinder 2, we've done it with Castles and Crusades now, with our Night Below campaign, and I really enjoy that. It is one of the reasons why I think it's cool, not only to try different game mechanics, but also because knowing how that character functions in one game gives you expectations for how that character is going to function in another game. So you sort of get a leg up in understanding what the character is capable of in a new game system, while, also learning the different ways that it sort of, it differs from that. So it's definitely, I really enjoy that. And as long as your players are okay with that too, like there's some players want to play, they sign up for one game, they only want to play that game. I don't like doing that. I like trying different systems, and I'm fortunate to play with a bunch of people who enjoy doing that as well. So it works out because we're ad item, as we say in our day job. We're of the same mind. It's a meeting of the minds. The players don't mind switching up. I don't mind switching up. So it works well for our table. But I do understand why, and I've had friends who don't like doing that stuff. If they're playing a certain game, they want to play only that game with those characters, and there's nothing wrong with that either. You just got to make sure you're wanting the same things out of whatever you're playing. So with that, I will bring this to a close. We're going to be back shortly. We're going to do another Witcher. If you're listening at time of recording, we're going to come back in a bit and create another Witcher character for tomorrow's session. But I think this is it for the State of the Union. As is always the case, I deeply appreciate everyone who takes time to watch our shows or to comment on the sessions or join us on Discord or whatever. Like we love hearing from everybody. All of us have been doing this long enough now that we're aware that we're sort of, there's three sort of ways of participating in the games. There's running the game, there's playing the game, and there's watching the game. And it's cool seeing, I know most of our players are all on chat when we're streaming. So it's cool seeing, I don't get a chance because I got to pay attention to the game and whatnot very often. But it's awesome hearing from folks in the community. So speaking of which, if you do want to join the Dungeon Musings community, you can find a link down below to the Dungeon Musings Discord server where we have channels dedicated to most of the games we run on the channel, as well as a bunch of other stuff. So tons of great people over there, tons of great conversations. You are more than welcome to join us over there. There's also a link down below to the Heroes Save Villages charity fundraising campaign we run on the channel. It benefits the SOS Children's Villages International Charity, a really great organization active in over 130 countries, benefiting over 80,000 orphan and abandoned children. And as a small way of saying thank you, any money that is donated through that link down below all goes directly to SOS Children's Villages International. None of it goes to the channel or any other middleman. It just goes to help the kids who benefit from their services. As a small way of saying thank you, though, for every $25 that you donate between now and the time of our next charity raffle, you'll get one chance to win the grand prize or one of the other great prizes in our next charity raffle. And our friends at Beetle and Grimm's Pandemonium Warehouse have been very generous in their support of all of our raffles from the very first one from like 2 or 3 years ago. And if they continue to support us, we're going to have some great prizes from them as well. We also, I've got something that I am holding in reserve, and I'm only going to announce if we need to have something really big as a grand prize, but I might have something pretty big for the next grand prize as well. And in addition to that, you'll also have a chance to have a say. If you donate between now and the time of our next charity session, you'll have a say in shaping what's going to be played and what's happening in that game. And I've got a fun idea for how donors can participate in the next one. I'll be sharing information about that, again, once those details are finalized, but there's some fun ways for you to spend the money that you donate as well to affect what's going to happen in our charity sessions. And again, all money that's donated goes directly to SOS Children's Villages International. And I should say they also have ongoing relief efforts in Ukraine and surrounding countries at the time of recording, and our thoughts are still with the people and members of our community in Ukraine who have been affected by the ongoing war from low these last many months, as well as the folks in Russia who have stood up against the invasion of Ukraine. Our thoughts are with you as well, because that's no small thing to be doing in a country run by an autocrat. The last thing I will say is a huge thank you to everybody who joined me for this State of the Union, as well in a larger perspective, those who join us on the channel for all of our games. We're inching up towards 6,000 subscribers, and I look forward to doing that Castles and Crusades overview. I still owe a 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons overview for the 5,000 subscribers, but I have not forgotten about that. I just need to figure out when I'm going to get that done. The last thing I will say is, as always, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that I've given you, or I hope I should say, that I've given you an hour and a half to take your mind off of the troubles of our world and think about not the troubles, but the fun games that we've been running on the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel and what we have planned for the coming 6 months. I hope that 2022 has treated you well. And, last thing I'll say, too, link down below to our friends at Noble Knight Games. Noble Knight Games is the preeminent retailer of out-of-print and hard-to-find games. It's fresh in my mind because I got another order coming from them on Monday. So I'm looking forward to that. The Noble Knight Games is the preeminent retailer of hard-to-find and out-of-print games in North America. They ship everywhere, but shipping nowadays is kind of bonkers. But Noble Knight has been the source of for me to complete several of my collections, particularly AD&D Second Edition and Champions Fourth Edition and Champions Fifth Edition. There's a lot of hard to find books that were in there, and between their stock, which has a ton of great out of print stuff, as well as their want list feature, which allows you to add something to the want list, and they'll send you an email when they get it in stock, and they restock fairly frequently with old stuff. They also sell new games and new board games and card games and whatnot, but my primary interest for them is their role-playing stuff. If you do purchase anything through their website for $10 or more, enter the code DungeonMuser at checkout, all one word. I got it listed down below, and you will save yourself 10% on your purchase. We don't get anything out of that. There's no kickback from them. They just happen to be, they've been amazing. The very rare times I've had trouble with my shipping, they've immediately resolved stuff, and then they're just great. They are very appreciative. I've got some cool Noble Knight dice they sent out because as a thank you to regular suppliers, and it's a very, very easy way of not especially during the pandemic, not being able to go to old game stores and search through out of stock stuff, or hunting around on eBay. I really, really like them quite a bit. So for those listening at home, I hope it gave you an hour and a half to hear about what's happened so far and take your mind off the world, the troubles of our world. And I'll be back soon with another Witcher character creation session, and then a bunch of fun games this weekend. Otherwise, we will see you again soon on the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. And until I see you again, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you for watching, and happy gaming.